server administration. In this nugget, we discuss some practical matters about how to actually administer your servers. We start off with a discussion of how to log on. I know that seems kind of simple, but the fact of the matter is, just because we're administrators doesn't mean we should log on as administrators. We should log on as domain users, and that's how we should log on. So that way we can prevent our machines from being logged on as administrator accounts and someone being able to take advantage of unprotected workstations potentially. And then when you do need to perform an administrative function, you can use something called the secondary logon, which is normally going to be right-clicking on a shortcut or an executable and choosing Run As and entering in administrator credentials to execute that function. You can also create a custom MMC console, which includes all of your commonly used administrative tools. And then you can access it as just a domain user, but by right-clicking and choosing Run As, again, you can use your secondary logon to launch all of the tools from within the console under whatever administrator credentials are necessary. And then finally, we'll talk about RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol, which has a new version in Windows Server 2003, and which gives you the ability to remotely assist users and to remotely administer servers. You know, a few years ago here in Phoenix, Arizona, I wanted to get a jump on some work, so I left the house early. It must have been around 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm driving on my way to work. There's not much traffic out, which is rare here in Phoenix. And finally, as I get close to work, I see a big straightaway, so I kind of press my foot down on the gas a little bit harder, and I get into work before anybody else, and I got lots of stuff done. Well, I thought that was a pretty successful day. However, about a week later, I got something in the mail, and it happened to be a speeding ticket. You see, where I had pushed my foot down on the gas to gain a little bit of momentum there on the straightaway was also where there was a Ford vehicle parked off to the side that I didn't pay much attention to at the time. But just so happens that was a photo radar car. And what happens is, if you're speeding, they have onboard radar that detect that. So they take a picture of the driver through the windshield. And then as you're passing the vehicle, it takes a picture of your license plate, and then it sends the ticket to whoever's registered with that license plate. Well, it was on a day like that I kind of wished that it was actually somebody else that was driving my car. And then I could have just switched identities with someone else so that I wouldn't have had to get a ticket. Because in fact, if you go into court and you contest the ticket and it's someone else who's driving and it's not you, well, you can usually get out of the ticket. In my case, however, I had to spend a Saturday in traffic school. Oh, what a great day that was. Well, let that be a lesson to all of you. Don't speed in Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, in any case, when I talked about wanting to be someone else on that day, that's kind of the same thing that we have as administrators. Because you see, as administrators on a normal basis, we should just be logging on with generic user accounts. For example, here I'm just logged on as Phoenix User 01. Yes, I'm an administrator, but I'm not logged on as an administrator. Why? Because I'm just going to be checking email and surfing the internet and looking at various kinds of Word documents that I've got to access, working with stuff that's in my home directory and all that. I'm going to be doing user stuff most of the day and a lot of days. I'm not going to really be doing hardcore administration in a lot of my daily duties, answering email and that kind of thing. So since that's the case, I should just log on as a generic user. Why? Because you see, if I leave my desktop to get a drink of water, get a cup of coffee, go to lunch, then someone else could just walk by this desk and say, "Ooh, hey, James is logged on. He's one of them high-powered administrators." I could just access his desktop and give myself my user account more access, or open up directories to myself and grant myself access permissions to things that I'm not supposed to be able to see. You see where this is going. All different kinds of things because of an unprotected workstation. So that's why we don't want to log on as administrators whenever possible. Also, a lot of viruses can work around this nowadays, but if you get attacked by a virus and you're logged on as the administrator, well, the virus can usually assume the same level of authority that you have. And since you have perhaps domain admin authority, then it could potentially corrupt the entire domain or Active Directory or something like that. So that's why we try not to log on as actual administrators much of the time. Now, what do you do when you do need to log on as an administrator? Well, sometimes there will be cases where you can't avoid that, so it's not like you can never do it. But other times you can also log on just as a generic user like I am here, and then you can go ahead and access other tools as necessary. Let me show you what I mean by that. So for example, if I can straighten my windows out here, for example, here I'm in a file location, and it has source files for me from the Windows Server 2003 CD-ROM, and in the i36 directory, there is a file called admin pack. And if you're familiar with Windows 2000, this is the same admin pack that we could have worked with in that version, only it was the Windows 2000 version. In any case, here I am on a Windows XP computer, and I want to double-click and install this admin pack, which will then install all of the administrator tools for me. Now I've already done that because it takes a few minutes, so I did that in advance. And once I have done that, I will then have administrative tools once I configure the start menu to show it to me on the start menu, and now I'd have Active Directory users and computers. However, if I go ahead and launch that, remember that I'm just logged on as a domain user as Phoenix User 01. So even though it opens up Active Directory users and computers for me, I really don't have much that I can do here. For example, maybe I want to change the group membership of a certain account. I go to this account right here, and I say I want to make them a member of domain admins, and it looks like I'm doing pretty good so far. I enter in domain admins here, and okay, it looks great. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and I can't because I don't have the permission to modify that item. So you see, Active Directory users and computers doesn't do me much good when I'm just logged on as that user. However, I can click on Start, go back to the administrative tools as just a domain user, go back up to Active Directory users and computers, and this is where I will put a different driver in the driver's seat. And this is how you do it. You simply click on Shift or press down Shift on the keyboard, right-click, and then choose Run As. Once I've done that, it gives me the opportunity to enter in alternative credentials for this tool. And you can enter in a UPN name like that, or the old NT4 style, which is like this, the name of the domain, slash, and then the name of the user. And I'm going to enter in the trainer's account because that's the enterprise admin and domain admin account here. And now I can go back into this tool, and now when I go to this member of tab here, I can go ahead and click on Add and add membership. Now I've added the domain admins there. I can go down here and click OK, and now I've been able to successfully make a change. That's because it's all been done under the credentials of the trainer account, just as if I had actually logged on to this desktop as the trainer. Now, once that's done, I still have to remember to close this interface because, again, if I go to another coffee break, sounds like I make an awful lot of coffee breaks, apparently. But anyway, if I go take another coffee break now, then someone else could still access this console, so I do need to remember to close that up. Now, another thing I should be able to do is to also work with shortcuts that I've placed, just wherever I want to. Now, I don't have the quick launch area down here, but I'm sure you're familiar with that. That's a little easily accessible area where you can put shortcuts or executables if you want. Normally, shortcuts are recommended to save on the size of your profile. But anyway, I can put a shortcut there. I can also right-click on it and choose Run As. Also, I could just take a shortcut and put it wherever I want to. So, for example, I'm going to right-click and drag out here to copy Active Directory users and computers out here. And then, of course, I could shift right-click here and choose Run As. And then let me show you another tip as well. For this, I would actually have to log on as an administrator, access this Phoenix User 01 profile within the file system, access this shortcut, and then as an administrator, I can right-click on it and choose Properties, and then I can go to the Advanced button down here, and then as the administrator, this would not be grayed out, but I could click Run with different credentials. At that point, then, every time I double-click on it, it would be the same as shift right-clicking and choosing Run As, only I wouldn't have to shift right-click. I just double-click on it, and it automatically pops this open where I can enter in someone else's credentials here. Now, another thing I might want to be able to access are things that are not actual shortcuts. For example, if I go to Control Panel, where I've switched to the classic view as opposed to the category view that we're used to, and I've done this because I don't want to click through 37 different little clicks to get to what I want. Anyway, what if I want to add or remove programs? Well, note if I double-click on that, just as Joe User like I am right now, nothing will happen. It will not allow me to install any applications. Likewise, if I right-click, nothing appears. But if I shift right-click once again, then I get the Run As dialog box, and I can enter in the credentials. Now, make sure that you enter in the domain that you want, so you can do it in the same format that appears here, just domain and then user. Or again, I always like the UPN name, so I'll type in trainer@nugetlab.com with my password and click OK. And now, anything I do from within here, I can add, remove components. I can make things Microsoft or non-Microsoft. Oh, isn't it interesting that they give that to us? So we could choose, different web browsers or something like that. We could go to add, remove Windows components, and we could add, remove items here. We could add new programs using the add new programs item. This is especially helpful because just remember that users cannot normally install their own applications. And with this, I could go ahead and run setup of some kind and add an app. So I think you can take my word for it from here that we can just add additional programs under additional credentials. Another one that I like, let me just point this one out, is the power options. You see, I've always felt that, and this is just my opinion, you can disagree with me if you want to, Others have, and they've been wrong too. But anyway, my opinion with the power options is users ought to be able to configure this, especially if they're on a laptop. I mean, if I'm on an airplane and I know it's going to be a long flight just as a user, I want to conserve as much battery power as I want, I ought to be able to adjust this. Anyway, Microsoft doesn't let us. So again, we have to be administrators, so I shift right click and run as, and from this point I can again enter in my appropriate credentials and make whatever changes are necessary to that. Now, again, for this, an administrator has to visit the desktop or use remote desktop, which I'll talk about a little bit later on here, to still do that, but at least it gives us a little bit more power here, and we don't have to log that user off before we can make those changes. Now, not everything that you want to do is in the control panel or has a shortcut. It might be something like a command line utility that you've downloaded, or it might be a resource kit utility that only has a command line. In that case, you'll need to go to a command prompt, and then you'll just simply use the run as command from here. And it looks much like this. You simply enter in run as /user, the name of the user, and again, you can use the NT4 style domain name if you want, flat domain. Then you enter the user there, and then after that, you type in whatever command you want. It could be Notepad, it could be, whatever command you want it to be. In this case, what I'll often do is, especially if I expect to be at the command prompt for a while, I want to do a few functions from the command line, what I'll do is just do CMD. What does that do? That will open up another command prompt for me. When it opens up the second command prompt window, everything I do from within that will be under the credentials of the trainer account. Now let me press enter here. It'll ask me for my password. And we'll press enter. And now you can see that this command prompt is running indeed as the trainer at NuggetLab.com. Now, if you like the command line, there's also some things, just FYI, that you might be able to type in from here. For example, if I like to use Active Directory users in computers, and I don't want to click all the way through the start menu to get it, then I can just do dsa.msc. Okay, dsa.msc would then pop open Active Directory users and computers for me, and there it is. Let me show you a couple other ones just so you know. For example, how would you know what DHCP console would be? How would you know what DNS or WINS or some of those kinds of things? A lot of these, you just type in the name of the service, for example, again, DHCP, and then you type in MGMT for management, mgmt.msc. So just type in the name of the service followed by MGMT, and then don't forget .msc because it's a Microsoft console, and press enter, and then it pops open the DHCP console. I could do the same thing for DNS MGMT, WINS MGMT, and the like. Let's take a look at another one. That's computermanagement.mgmt.msc, and this one's also very useful because as administrators, you'll need to be able to do a lot of the stuff from within this console, even when you're doing help desk kind of things for people's XP machines. Now, of course, you could use the same computer management to connect to a server. It doesn't matter. In any case, let me just point out something as well here as a side note, in case I haven't mentioned it in the past, and that is that users can also access a lot of these kinds of tools, like their system properties, computer management, things of this nature, and they can usually look at information. Just for example, they could right-click my computer, choose properties, and see the version of Windows that they're working with. They could look at Event Viewer, and they could see, for example, the application or system event logs. But Microsoft draws the line when it comes to something that's security sensitive. So, for example, the users would not be able to access the security event log, nor could they change anything in Device Manager, although, again, they could see stuff, but they wouldn't be able to actually change anything or to change group membership and that kind of stuff. Likewise, they can't use Disk Defragmenter. That's another peeve of mine. Disk Defragmenter usually has no security or other implications in terms of something bad for the system or bad for the user. I think the users ought to be able to defragment their own systems, but then again, I'm on my soapbox there. All right, so let's go ahead and close this out, and let me just point out that in the background here offline, I've also run a search against star or wildcard for anything beginning with whatever, .mcsc, to show you just that there are several other MSC consoles that you can run here. Many of them explain themselves, DFS, Disk Defragmenter, certificate services, directory services, sites and services, all that kind of stuff. If you want to just search for some of those to get a head start on some of the other console items you can run, be my guest. Now, using Run As, I've again launched computer management here, where I can access it as an administrator. However, in terms of server management, I can't really manage my server from this Windows XP computer right now because the focus is on just this local XP machine. So what I need to do to manage servers is to right-click and choose Connect to another computer. And since I'm already logged on as an administrator account using this console, when I connect to another computer by entering in its name here, then it also allows me to connect to this server under the same credentials I entered in to start computer management in the first place. And you can do a lot of different things here. I can look at all the event viewer stuff. I can look at device manager. However, device manager only allows me to look at it in a read-only mode, so I can't update drivers, I can't change resource allocation or anything like that. That's basically what this message is telling me right here. Likewise for storage, I could make some changes in disk management, but I could not run a disk defragmenter remotely. Now then, here I've logged on as an administrator, and the reason why I've done this to log on as trainer is because now I've got a whole bunch of things that I'm going to be doing as an administrator, and I'm just going to set some things up so that when I log on as Phoenix User 01 again, I'll have various tools at my fingertips. A couple of things I want to point out before we get to those items, however, is if I go back to something like administrative tools and Active Directory users and computers, where now, of course, I have administrative access, if I have other domains that I want to connect to, I can still remotely connect to those other domains as well. Simply right-click, connect to domain, and then will allow me to browse for another domain if I need to, like cbtnuggets.com, for example. I can also browse to another domain controller, so that's another way to remotely manage other servers. You simply click connect to another domain controller and choose some other domain controller for existing domain. So if there's one available, you'll be able to pick from the list. And most of the tools that you'll open, whether it's DHCP, DNS, WINS, certificate services, Active Directory users and computers, computer management, all those things allow you to right-click high up in the nodes there and connect to another computer. So it's really just a matter of right-clicking and selecting which other domain or which other computer that you're interested in. Now, the other thing I want to be able to do is to put tools at my fingertips, and for this, as the administrator, I usually like to make sure that I can use my quick launch area, and you can just differ with me on this as you like. You can use this, not use it. You can use shortcuts on the desktops, whatever else you want to use. But for my purposes, I'm going to add additional items to this quick launch area, and I'm going to unlock the taskbar so that I can expand this and add additional MMC console items. To do this, I'm going to click on Start, and then I'm going to go to a run line or to a command line. And apparently I don't have a big enough start menu to show my run command, so I'm just going to go ahead and go to instead a command prompt here, and we'll go in here, and I'm just going to run MMC. And that's all I'm going to do is to open a blank MMC console. The purpose for doing this is I want to populate this with common things that I will need to run as an administrator. Now my objective then is to, once I've filled this up with, the DNS console and Active Directory users and computers, computer management, whatever else I want, once I've got that all configured and focused on the right computers or domains that I want, then I'll save this as its own independent console and create a shortcut to it when I'm logged on as Phoenix 01. And then when I right-click on it and choose Run As, I can run all those tools from within a single console under the administrator account, in this case the trainer account. So in order to run this, we simply go to File. Now, because this is a blank console, which doesn't really do us any good by itself, click Add, Remove, Snap-in. And when you look at all the consoles, whether it's Active Directory users and computers, all that, those are all just MMC consoles with the snap-in already pre-built. So we'll click Add here, and we'll just add in whatever it is that we are interested in running. Let's just say Domains and Trusts. We won't really be using that here, but I just want to show that I can put it in there if I want. Sites and Services, Users and Computers. And I'm just double-clicking on these to add them. I can also select and click Add down here if I want. Computer management, and then when I do that, it allows me to select the local computer. I'm never going to use it on this WinXP computer. I'm always going to use it on another machine, so I'll just do DC Nugget 1 for that one. And you can also do it locally. And in fact, again, even once I've got it in there, you can always right-click and choose a different focus if you want. I'll just go, how about DHCP, DNS, and that should do pretty good for now, just for illustration purposes, if nothing else. So I'll go ahead and click OK here. And now I've got this MMC console ready to go. Now I don't have to click through the silly start menu to get to every little single thing that I want to do. And I could probably run most of my day doing most administrative duties that I would ever need to do using just exactly what I've got here. So next thing I need to do then is to go ahead and save this. And when I save it, I just give it an intuitive name. I'll just call it Administrative Console or something like this. And notice that it does save it in the local desktop documents and settings for trainer, not desktop, but documents and settings for the trainer account under administrative tools. If I want to be able to access this as the Phoenix User 01 account, I'm going to need to put it in another common location where I could access it. And here now you see that I've changed where I'm browsing into my Microsoft Windows Network, and I've gone to DC Nugget 1 Home and this Phoenix User 01 Home directory, where now I'm going to save this administrative console. Another reason why I'm doing this there is because as the Phoenix User 01 account, if I need to go to another user's computer or I happen to be in a different office or something like that, I should still be able to access the same administrative console. I don't want to have to rebuild it every time I go visit a different machine. So now it's saved. Now let me give you just a couple of other quick tips with this. The first thing is, once I open this, save it, and then if I open it up again later on, every time I close it, it's going to ask me if I want to save the changes. So I can avoid seeing just that nagging prompt every time by going to the options here. And then with this, I can change it from author mode to user mode full access. And these are just various ways of accessing this MMC console. Author mode, of course, gives me full control of everything. User mode also gives me full control. However, with this, I'll be able to access all parts of it, but I will not be able to add or remove anything from the console. And then this just will allow me to use a multiple window or a single window. I'll just choose user mode full access, and then I'll say do not save changes to this console. Now, I'll go ahead and close it now, at which point it will ask me if I want to save everything. That's okay for this one time. Next time I open it, however, it's not going to give me that. Now then, skipping ahead here, I have browsed to DC Nugget 1 in the home directory for Phoenix User 01. I've got my administrative console. I could just double-click on it and it would open right up. For my purposes right now, I'll just right-click and drag down here in my quick launch area, create a shortcut there, and close this. And now, every time I want to be able to run this, I just click it, and it automatically pops open all of the tools that I want, and I'm all ready to go. And I'll simply do the same thing on my Phoenix User 01 account. Under the credentials of Phoenix User 01, users do have the ability to make available the quick launch area here, and so that's all available to me. Also, if I want to make changes to it, all I have to do is to right-click it and choose Author, and it takes me back into Author mode where I can add or remove a various component, because remember, I saved it as user mode full access, which prevents me from adding or removing different snap-ins. And also you can see obviously here that I can run as, so that when I am logged on as Phoenix User 01, I can run as my trainer account by entering in the appropriate credentials. Now in terms of remote administration, there is another way of getting there, and that's using the RDP protocol, which is the Remote Desktop Protocol. The RDP protocol is version 5.2 with Windows Server 2003 and Windows XP, and this allows us to connect using three different methods. Number one, we can use terminal services, which we've seen in previous versions of Windows and which I'll talk about in our next nugget. Number two, we could use remote desktop, and that's exactly how you've seen me connect through the whole series here, by connecting, for example, over this Windows XP computer. It's just using remote desktop here, and all I have to do is to click a little remote desktop connection, which is also on the start menu, and we'll discuss this a little bit more later on. Specify a computer that I want to connect to. Then when I click in connect here, just enter in credentials as if I were logging on locally to that computer. There's several options that you can also configure for the remote desktop connection, and also we will be discussing those items. Now, the remote desktop connection is an excellent way not only to do remote connections to your own machine so that you can be more productive, it's also a great way to remotely administer servers, whether they're Windows 2000 or Windows Server 2003. Now, for Windows 2000 servers that you want to use with RDP, they're going to have terminal services for administration enabled, rather than terminal services for applications as we've seen in the past. Under Windows Server 2003, we already have the capability to connect remotely to all the terminal services clients with Windows Server 2003. And you'll see that if you go to the computer's system properties and go to the remote tab, you'll have this checkbox for allow users to remotely connect to this computer, and that allows up to 2 administrators to connect at one time. There can actually be 3 connections going on. 2 users who are using remote desktop, as well as the console session, which is the actual physical desktop logon that you see me using right now. That's the actual console logon. Then you can also specify which users you want to be able to allow to connect. By default, any member of the administrators group can connect, and you can also select individual user accounts as well. And all you do is simply click the Add button and then select from the Select Users or Groups dialog box that we've seen many times in the past. Let me also return to that dialog box briefly here for a moment. Notice that in the Add item here, I can select object types of users or groups, whereas in Windows XP client operating systems, you can only select users. So the fact that you can select groups here is very handy because you might want to add server operators or some other kind of custom group that you've configured in that dialog box. Now, terminal services in remote desktop are really very, very similar. In fact, they use the same technology, and the functional description involves all of these things. They both use the RDP version, or Remote Desktop Protocol version 5.2. RDP is a multimedia protocol that's designed to easily and quickly transmit multimedia kinds of elements, such as what you would see with the output of a remote desktop connection. That's why with remote desktop protocol, it easily and pretty beautifully, actually, in terms of color depth and resolution and all that, can give me a Windows XP desktop or a Windows Server 2003 desktop, whatever I want, and it's pretty much the same experience visually as if I were seated there. It's also very customizable, and we'll be looking at these things in the next nugget. You can customize your remote desktop connections so that you can give granular control over what keyboard functions take place, what drives you connect to, what printers you're able to use, all those things. Very, very flexible configuration there. And in fact, it really competes pretty closely to Citrix's own ICA client. And Citrix is another company that does a similar functionality to terminal services. If you're already using Citrix and you're happy with it, just go ahead and stick with it. But if you're trying to save some money, or if you're in a budget crunch or something like that, and if you needed to remove it, I'm not recommending that you do that necessarily, because Citrix makes an excellent product. But you should look at terminal services and or just remote desktop, because it does give you an awful lot of capability for really no more money if you just can use remote desktop. Terminal services does have licensing fees, however, which we'll discuss in our next nugget. It's also very secure. There are several levels of encryption you can go through. And even if someone were able to crack it, it's very difficult to make sense out of it, because it's kind of like trying to put together pieces of paper from out of a shredder when you're trying to decipher exactly what you're looking at. So far there's been no real exploits against the security of terminal services and or remote desktop. Also, remote desktop and terminal services uses TCP port 3389, and that has relevance to your firewalls, your proxy servers, and that sort of thing. I'm going to throw up a couple of other knowledge-based articles here if you want, and these will show you how, if you want to, you can change off of using TCP port 3389. The reason why you might want to do that, is because every hacker in the world knows that this is the same port that's used for terminal services and RDP. However, any hacker worth their salt will also be able to determine, with not too much effort, what protocol, what port you've changed to, if you want to do that. And then here are the knowledge-based articles. And if you have not used knowledge-based articles in the past, just simply go to technet.com or Microsoft.com, go to the support section and look for the knowledge base, and then just do a search for these numbers, and it'll get you right there. Now let me also make a quick side note here. If you want to double check which ports are open and listening and which ports are already established, we can see whether or not there's anything going on, for example, with port 3389. We simply do that by going to a command prompt and typing netstat with a -A at the end, and then it will take a look at all the established and listening ports. It's going to scroll off here in a minute, so we'll have to go back up to the top. There we go. And then you see here that DC Nugget 1 is listening on port 3389. There's nobody that has tried to make a remote connection to it right now. That's why we have 0. Over here, if someone had made a connection to my port 3389, it would show the port on the opposite end of the connection right here, showing which connection that they had made. Likewise, down here, we see that we do have a connection to client 01, and that's exactly what this Windows XP connection is. I've shown you a few times here. And it is established on 3389 on client 01's listening side. Now that it's established, it completes the connection on our side, where we're physically located right now, by using a randomly generated port, and in this case it was port 2130. Now the RDP protocol can be used for one of these 3 types of remote connections. The first one is remote desktop. The emphasis on this is for my own productivity. I'm at home and I realize I forgot to create a report on my server at work. So I can use remote desktop if I've got the firewall connectivity and all that and port 3389 is open. I can dial in or use my cable modem to connect to that server at work. When I do that, that server becomes locked on the screen side on its end. On my end, I can work with it just as if I was actually seated at that desktop. Also, with remote assistance, this involves 2 people. It involves an expert, which would be you or the help desk person, and it involves a novice, which would be the user. And with this, in this remote assistance scenario, the remote assistance user requests for help from the expert, and they can send an invitation a number of different ways, which I'll show you. And when the expert accepts the invitation, you have 2 people viewing the desktop, with 1 person initially controlling the desktop. That's just the novice. The novice can also allow you to take control, in which case both you and the novice will be able to control the keyboard and mouse as well. And then terminal services simply give us better productivity and better use of our hardware. For example, if you have old or outdated hardware that can barely run its existing operating system, well, you can upgrade a few servers instead of all, several thousands of your desktops, and then all the users connect to the terminal services and get their desktop experience and their application and processing power directly from the servers instead of having to upgrade individual desktops instead. And from the user's experience, they're really not missing out on much. And we'll get into more detail about each one of these items in our next nugget. In this nugget, we took a look at administration in general and how to administer our systems from our actual user logon. We want to make sure we log on only as domain users and not as administrator accounts so that someone could use our credentials if we happen to be away from our desktop and perform some kind of a damaging or incriminating action. We also want to be able to use a secondary logon so that even though we're logged on as a domain user, we can still perform an administrative function by entering in administrator credentials to run certain tools. And we can use that secondary logon to launch a custom MMC console that you might have created, and that will have included with it all of the common administrative tools that you use. That way you launch one console to give you all the tools that you'll commonly use as an administrator, and you don't have to do a whole bunch of secondary logons individually. Also, we took a look at RDP, or the Remote Desktop Protocol. This kind of sets us up for our next nugget, in which we talk about more detail with remote desktop, remote assistance, and terminal services. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.